So tonight at the Active Travel Cafe, we will start with our usual crowdsource news update, but included in that we have Carol and Axtell from Possible, who's going to share their new parking action map. Then we move on to kind of our main speakers for this evening, and we have 5 amazing speakers who are here to talk to us about a campaigner trip to Paris. Then finally, we will finish off with our regular Ranty Highwayman slot, and he is going to talk about rural networks tonight. So to start us off, does anyone have anything to share, anything news to share, anything that you kind of think is worth discussing that's happening nationally, or anything local that you want to either make us aware of or ask questions about? Bob, you were there with a hand up.
Hi there. Hello, everybody. Yes, from London Borough of Brent, the council's given an ultimatum to Lime, the e-bike hire company, to talk about it's basically about terminating their contract because of the problems of bicycles being left around and causing hazards on pavement. Now, in fact, other boroughs have managed to deal with this. There are ways in which you can set up your tender for a contract with an e-bike hire provider, which will deal with the issues. Other boroughs have managed to do that in London, and Brent hasn't managed to. There are also issues with pavement parking, which is more of a problem for hindering people on the footway in Brent. So it's basically messed up. But I just wanted to raise the issue for everybody because I think the hire e-bikes are doing a great deal to get people riding bikes. Certainly seems to be happening in Brent, but the Highway Authority hasn't been able to get its act together with providing bays and so on in this borough, and I think it's a major issue.
Thank you, Bob. Mark, do you want to come in? Do you have something to say about that, or have you got something else to talk about?
Well, actually, I was going to say something else about hire bikes, but I'll come in on that. By the way, I have offered to do a bike share session at some point, and that still stands. Bob, you're wrong. Brent have no contract with Lime whatsoever, so they can't terminate a contract. They can the only council in London that has a contract is actually Hackney. So one of the problems is this grey area. London is particularly because Lime can come in because there's a market there for Lime to do it. But there is this grey area of who, they have an MOU but not a contract. So MOUs are not worth anything. So they can't make them do anything. But the whole London issue is one thing. But I was in Oxford, and Robin could talk about what's happened in Oxford, where Voy are in Oxford, and Lime have just come in at, if there is anyone from Lime here, price gouging. They've come in at half the price they are in London. And basically, they're not going to make a profit. And it's very clear what they're doing is trying to screw Voy so that Voy will pull out. And there doesn't seem to be any obvious reason for that otherwise. So the whole bike share sphere needs attention, but it's important to get things right about London and elsewhere where it's different. What I wanted to raise was that the scheme that I've been working on for 5 years, pre-lockdown in Guildford, has just launched last week with Beryl, and that is a contracted scheme. Surrey County Council are putting £1 million into it. The scheme have also worked in Stevenage, is going to go live very soon, and they're putting 800k in. And it's only in places where the council puts money in, like they do with supported bus networks, the council can actually tell the operator what to do, because then it's a proper contract. They can put bikes in areas which are underused and so on. And that's a very different ballgame. And certainly in the rest of Europe, that's how it works. But the rest of Europe also has rules about what can be done, which we don't have. So it's quite complicated, but essentially they are, as Bob said, they are a really good thing. They do get people who don't cycle to cycle, especially women. But the flip side needs to be addressed as well. And what's interesting, by the way, is that we'll hear about Paris. Paris has banned e-scooters. Barcelona banned e-scooters some time ago, hire e-scooters. And Madrid has just voted to ban e-scooters. And they're putting all the money they put into supporting e-scooters into bikes because of the health benefits that they see there as opposed to scooters. So it might be interesting for the Paris people to tell us about how they saw that, if that's something that they crossed their path. But I would like to do a longer piece at some point if you can slot me in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for that offer. Sally.
Hi, just a quick one. I live in Weybridge, and you probably don't read might not read these newspapers, but apparently there's a big piece in the Daily Mail and the Telegraph today about a couple of bollards that are killing our town's shops. And of course, the article's all nonsense. But I think it's a local reporter in the local Surrey paper wants to make a name for herself and is sort of bigging this up as a great battle. But it is true that in this particular street, there are very mixed views on whether the scheme we've had since COVID, which blocks off a through road, is it does make life a bit difficult for some of the residents there. Anyway, what I would, if anybody could help me by quoting any research that's supportive of businesses in areas where traffic's been restricted, doing better or at least no worse. I mean, I'm pretty sure that the businesses that they claim are suffering for other reasons, like online shopping and such like. But if anybody's got any good research that applies in smaller towns, then I'd very much welcome it.
Thank you, Sally. I think if anybody does have any ideas, please put them in the chat. But I think you're probably right. It's very hard, isn't it, to prove that kind of cause and effect. H, you have a hand up.
Thanks, Sally. Yeah, I was going to catch in on this. I'm just typing something into chat. But in Scotland, we've never had the problem with public bike hire because we use Section 97 of the Road Scotland Act because we have separate legal system. It means that public bike hire is considered to be street trading and must have a license. When you issue the license, you set terms and conditions and KPI. And additionally, I managed to get the local bike hub to contract as the operator of the system for Nextbike. They have now fed that off because they're a charity, and they work with a company called VeloLogic, who provide the service locally, train up mechanics and so forth locally, connected to the local bike hub. VeloLogic have also got the contract, I gather, for Leeds, which is now expanding with Beryl. So they will work with Beryl, they'll work with Nextbike as a local contractor to manage the bikes. And I think that's where London has gone wrong. This is street trading, it needs a license. You're making a profit from the use of public roads, and you need to have performance issues on it. I can expand on it, but that's what I'm.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. That's really, really a good point.
I've only been doing this since 1996 when I did Portsmouth.
They're not listening to you. They're not listening, H.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Right, and I'll take Guy, and then we're going to move on to Carolyn so that we can get on with the rest of the agenda.
Hello. Yeah, it wouldn't be Active Traffic Cafe without talking about CRSTS. Adam normally does it. I'm going to do it tonight. Our LTN package went in front of a kind of scrutiny committee last week, and it was waved through. And what we're hearing is that the deadline for spending CRSTS is not going to be moved, despite some protests around that. And what we saw in what went to scrutiny was good, but a long way from perfect. By our reckoning, only half of the schemes actually were genuine LTNs, and the rest didn't meet the funding criteria. But there's a huge amount of pressure to spend money now. And so I guess everyone in CRSTS regions is going to have to think about how much of a fuss you kick up when you see stuff being waved through that you're not terribly happy with, which is what we've just experienced. But yeah, they've got 2.5 years to spend a lot of money. So we may see more of that suboptimal schemes. Sometimes it's better to get anything in than nothing. So yeah, and Adam can follow up on CRSTS if you've got anything to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy. Yeah, I mean, and I think, different people might want to, depending on where you are in the country, might want to go and look at what's happening. in your area. Somebody's asked, what does CRSTS stand for? I think it's City Region Sustainable Transport Settlements. And that's for not just for active travel, that's for also for bus network and what have you as well. And so we might see people moving pots of money around now so that they can spend them.
Yeah, it was a kind of Boris Johnson thing to try and make city regions a bit like TfL, better funded, but we are actually seeing the bus network grabbing a lot of the money as well. Yeah. So it's supposed to be for active travel as well as buses.
Yeah. Thank you, Guy. And so we're going to move on to Carolyn now. Do you want to share your screen, and I'll let you introduce your topic?
Yeah, for sure. Here we go. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
And if I, whoops, is that gone?
No, I can see it. It's good. Do you want to make it full screen?
Yeah, hold on. I'm just trying to get my, hold on. If I get my...
Oh, there you go. Perfect. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, no, gone again.
Okay, great. So can you, I can see my notes, but can you guys just see the presentation?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So I'm going to try and keep this to 5 minutes, and then we've got a few minutes for questions because I know you've got a really crammed agenda this evening. So why we are looking at parking policy, as you guys know, every car journey starts and ends with a parking space. And parking policy has got a key role to play in reducing carbon emissions from transport. And it's an underutilized but powerful lever to reduce car trips, traffic, and car ownership to create more space for people and fight climate change. In practice, though, it's generally used as a tool to manage parking demand or generate revenue rather than as part of the transport decarbonisation solution. And that's also true for some of the councils that have declared climate emergencies. So we teamed up with CPRE London to develop their parking policy benchmark into an online tool that you can use to assess your council's parking policy. And we worked with Living Streets and Wheels for Wellbeing, who provided feedback on the tool. And the parking policy benchmark builds on the recommendations of Centre for London's report from 2020 about the future of parking and curbside management in London. So this is a London specific project at the moment. And the parking action tool is aimed at residents, campaigners like yourselves, council officers, council members, really anybody with an interest in how parking policy can be used to take action on climate change and car dominance. But it is more suited to use in urban areas, such as cities than rural areas. In terms of how the tool works, we created a framework by grouping these different policy areas into 10 sections and then identifying the key policies that we wanted to see in each category. So the more policies a council has in place, the higher they score in each category. And then their overall score is their average across all categories. So it's a little bit like the Healthy Street scorecard. And councils end up with a score, you know, sort of good, requires improvement, or in desperate measures or something. It's a bit like an Ofsted. So these are the kind of things that we were looking for. We could only assess policy on what was clearly stated on councils' websites. So we couldn't go on the basis of sort of anecdotal evidence. It had to be something they had made a clear commitment to in policy. And here are more examples of the kind of things that we were looking for, but you can see the rest of the questions in the tool itself. So we then used the tool to assess each of the 33 London boroughs, and these are our findings. So we found a really wide variation in results, as you perhaps might expect. And we really found a lot of kind of talking the talk, but not walking the walk. So lots of boroughs were repeating things from the Mayor's transport strategy in their local implementation plans, but they weren't actually translating that into policy. Yeah, so we really found that very few councils were using parking policy to achieve their air quality and public health targets. Some of them did reference the hierarchy of transport needs in their documents, including sort of on active travel, but they didn't reflect that in their policies on curbside use. So we found examples like giving out free electric vehicle permits while simultaneously charging over £100 a year for storing one cycle in a cycle hanger. And in some boroughs, even the annual permits for petrol cars are cheaper than cycle hanger spaces. Some councils base their policies on financial costs without regard to considerations such as climate or air quality, like Hammersmith and Fulham, as we can see here. And then, of course, other councils like Lambeth do place the climate, health and social aspects at the centre of their policies. Some of the things that we found that were positive were that many outer boroughs were allocating curb space to car club vehicles. There was good progress on supporting the switch to electric vehicles. And Haringey was notable as the best outer borough. And obviously we've got boroughs like Lambeth that are really leading the way with their curbside strategy that's got really clear targets around planting trees every 25 metres and making sure 10% of the curbside is permeable and so forth. I'm sure many people are familiar with that. Hackney's really led the way with its community parklet policy, and we've now got 4 boroughs in London that have community parklet policies. But overall, we found that councils really need to do more, particularly on things like acknowledging the need for a parking policy to be fair to non-car owners, tackling blue badge fraud. There are hardly any boroughs that are exploring workplace parking levy as an option. And we need to see more commitment to making electric vehicle charging points accessible to all drivers, including disabled drivers. So we're calling for these things, all London councils to commit to allocating 25% of their curbside for sustainable use, more control parking, especially on housing estates, car-free housing developments as the norm, and improved parking policy in outer London boroughs, of course, along with improved public transport. We've published a map of our results, although it's important to say that that's already out of date almost as soon as we published it, because some boroughs have made changes to their parking policies that aren't reflected, such as Waltham Forest very recently put out a consultation about removing their free parking, which is obviously exactly what we want to see. In terms of what you can do, you can assess your council's parking policy using our online tool. You will need to do a little bit of research first, just going through the website to look at your council's parking policy, or you can cut to the chase and just use our Write to Councillor tool to email your councillors, you know, with one of those ready-made emails with all your councillors' details, asking them to take action on parking. You can share our parking action map and tag your councillors. And you can also give us feedback on our tool. That would be really helpful. Yeah, and also just to say that we've got a few other projects coming up, such as Get Shady, which is our new 3-year campaign, working in 4 London boroughs to replace on-street parking with street trees. We've got a parklets toolkit coming out soon. We've got our new cabbies for the climate campaign. And Izzy Romilly is going to come and share our Hot Wheels project with you in November, where we've been working with food delivery couriers to campaign for support to switch to e-bikes. So that's me wrapping up.
Thank you.
My details are there, and I'm happy to take any questions if we've got time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's really brilliant. It's always really great to hear about the work that Possible are doing. Always really super innovative. I don't know if there are any questions. I'm just going to quickly check. Not that I can see in the chat. If anybody wants, actually, do you want to stop your slide share and then we'll be able. Oh yeah, I can see a couple of hands up now.
That stopped already.
Oh no.
Okay, while you gather the questions. It's funny because it's giving me the option to share as if I'm not already sharing. I don't know what's going on there. Has that worked?
No, you're still there. I don't know if we can.
Oh, yeah. Okay, it's only come up in this tab.
There you go. Perfect. Great. I was going to ask you just to sort of start off with, because I'm always interested in children and in play, whether you'd thought about considering a question around use of space. I mean, and I can see you've got parklets in there, but whether there's a use of space for play, and there's a sort of that's another kind of thing to evaluate against that we often kind of forget about.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think we have got anything specifically because it was based on CPRE London's existing parking policy benchmark. I think it does include, like, there are links in there around play streets, I'm just trying to remember what there is in terms of content in the questions. Yeah, I don't think we have got anything specifically on play.
And just I just suppose to offer up that playing out can be a really good sounding board as well for developing that kind of.
Yeah, we have got reference to playing out and a lot about things like pop-up parklets in the parklets toolkit that's coming out soon.
Yeah,
so there's a bit more emphasis there.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm just going to go in order that I can see people's hands up. Clive, you're first.
Oh yeah, thanks for the presentation, Carolyn. There was one point I noticed you mentioned consultations, and I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on more thoughts around this. In our town, where we have a medium-sized town with a real congestion problem in the centre, and the council, with very good intentions, had a consultation, but they cast the net for this consultation very, very wide. So those residents in the centre who would really benefit from a parking policy that decongested their areas was effectively drowned out by people living further out in the town who really just fancied the chance to retain their free parking. So my question, I suppose, is do you have any thoughts, observations, or advice about if a consultation is staged around this sort of thing, how it should be worded, what makes a good consultation or a bad consultation when it comes to parking?
I think using representative polling is good and not relying on consultation, because we all know what happens with consultations. People that are afraid of change sort of mobilize everybody, and often what you get is not representative, and there are many people that maybe don't mind either way but are not necessarily going to take part in the consultation. So you really need your politicians to stand up and have a bit of courage. We have got some good resources from our Riders on the Storm event that we did last summer, which was all around really how to successfully tackle traffic reduction in urban areas, and not how to kind of do that without worrying too much about upsetting people, and we've got some really good data in there. Yeah, so I can link to that in the chat. We've got all the presentations and stuff from the day, because some of those resources might be helpful for your local councillors to help them sort of hold their nerve a bit.
Right, thanks a lot.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to take Matthew and Rachel, and H, would you mind putting yours in the chat? I'm just conscious that we've heard from you once already. We've got loads to get through tonight. That would be brilliant. Matthew, do you want to go first?
Yes, thank you very much, Carol. I was wondering, one of the things that councils complain about is the volume of requests for lots of information. I know there's a body that does analysis of councils' climate emergency action plans, which rather swamps, especially Darlington, which is one of the smallest unitary authorities. Our 2 staff do get swamped on that one. So does your checklist, is it manageable for officer time? And the second thing was, do you look at or budget? Often there was an attempt to increase residents' parking permit costs, which were countered by opposition councillors, that you couldn't raise money through measures to do with parking. But I understand that the law says that they're allowed to support a wider transport policy. So do you look at the amount of revenue a council raises through parking, and how that money is spent on the round transport policies that support things like cleaner air and healthier, active citizens and climate change, etc.?
Yeah, that is one of the questions in the tool, is that the minimum should be basically it shouldn't cost more for a return bus journey than it should to park, because obviously that's going to de-incentivize people. So we have got that in there, and I think you can always make a case for raising the cost of parking if the money is going to go back into sustainable transport, and that's the story that you want people to be telling, that it's actually going to benefit people. What was the first part of your question, Matthew? Sorry.
Sorry, it was about the volume of information that officers are requested to give, which is sometimes used as a reason for not answering these questions. Is using the tool, is the onus on the person using the tool to do the research rather than sending off huge forms to officers?
Yeah, it is. So it's entirely based on just scouring the and we've got a guidance document on where to find relevant. I mean, you will find parking policy in bits and bobs in different places, but the onus is entirely upon the person that's doing the assessment. You might sometimes get a council turn around and say, well, actually, we disagree with you about the results that you've got there, because it's a little bit of a blunt tool. But you know, ultimately, if they're engaging with you and they're trying to defend their policy, you know, then that's obviously a good sign, and you can take that engagement further.
Thank you very much, Carolyn.
You're welcome. Do have a look at the tool, guys, and yeah, play around with it.
And finally, Rachel, and then I'm going to ask Carolyn if you've got time to stay on. I think there's at least one question in the chat, but I'm gonna, if you wouldn't mind having a look and see if you could answer that there.
Yeah, that's fine. Do you want me to answer those ones in the chat?
Yeah, that would be great. But I think Rachel has a question first. We'll let her ask her question and then we'll move.
Yeah, so when I look at some of the things going on in London, I think actually, you know, things like this isn't that dissimilar to some of our really small village centres. So I live on the outskirts of Leicester, but we've got a number of villages that are just sort of scattered around the outside. And we've got a problem with too many cars that residents own and using that road space. And we don't have marked out spaces typically. So I think there's a couple of things that need to happen is marked out spaces, which, you know, ultimately residents will need to pay for, because that will start to lower demand. But the difficulty we have in doing that is we're not London, so the transport isn't probably of the same ilk. So I think the only way we can start to introduce more resident parking, on-street parking, you know, marked out spaces and so on, because is to provide those alternatives and to have those available, which, you know, hopefully over time we will have. But I just wondered whether you'd come across that kind of pushback, because I actually do think it's a critical part of reducing car volumes, but you have to, you know, have the carrot and the stick. And at the minute, you know, so far I can see the stick, but I can't see the carrot. So yeah, any issues that you've come across like that where you've
all the data tells us that you know, the carrots on their own are not going to do anything, and you just use the carrots to kind of make the sticks a bit more palatable, but you've got to have the, you know, the sticks in there as well. And yeah, the first thing that you need is the controlled parking, and people are likely to resist that, but if you can also you know, the kind of promote the benefits of that as well, because of course for those people that do own cars, it usually makes it easier to get a space once you've got controlled parking in there. And a lot of it, I think, is just people's difficulty, you know, the resistance to change, especially like you say, if you haven't got the kind of broader choice architecture with, like, you know, decent public transport there. So I think it's about engaging your councillors in the sort of wider conversation, to campaign for the improved public transport, and perhaps encouraging people to see the benefits of bringing in controlled parking.
Yeah, I think it'd be really hard to do it in isolation. I think, you know, you go off to offer the car share options, or, you know, EV car hubs. The bus service has got to become more reliable, you know, and all of that. And I think it's probably easier. I think just going in with, you know, resident parking and what have you is just, you're just automatically going to get the reaction.
Yeah, so you want people to feel like they're being given something rather than just having something taken away.
Yeah.
I'll share a copy of our Car Free Cities messaging guide in the chat as well.
That'd be really good. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Carolyn, for coming and sharing that. It's really, really great. And I'm sure it'll be, a lot of people are going to find that a really useful resource.
Welcome. I'll pop a few links in the chat for anyone that hasn't already seen, because we've got loads of good resources. Although the Car Free Cities campaign is finished, we've got some really useful resources there.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, and if you can have a look at those, any questions that we've kind of not managed to mop up, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
And if anybody wants to ping me an email with further questions, obviously you're very welcome to.
Great, thank you. And now we're going to move on to our, well, we now have 5 speakers in very quick succession. We're going to hear from a group of campaigners from, I think, mainly London and Oxford, who had a fantastic trip to Paris to find out about all the good work going on there, and they're going to share their findings with us. And I think to kick us off, we've got Ailey Murray. Are you there?
I'm here. I'm ready and waiting.
I will hand over to you. Do you want to share your screen?
Thanks, Sally. I think Sylvia's in charge of slides. So
I'm sorry. Yes, she's in charge. Sylvia wants to share slides.
5 Go Mad in Paris. Well done, Tim. That's what it was like. It was a fantastic trip. So I'm Ailey Murray. I'm currently chair of the LCC trustees.
Hang on a minute, because I don't seem to be able to. Oh, hang on.
You want to try just
yeah, we've
go.
rehearsed.
We did rehearse. Yeah. Computer says no now. Oh no.
Here we go.
Yeah, do you want to make it full screen?
Is it full screen?
Perfect. Yeah. Off you go.
Lovely. Thank you. I have to say that following Chris Boardman last week, it's a bit of a hard act to follow, but we'll do our best. We've got a few speakers to give them their own personal key points they picked up from the trip. So a bit of context, it came out of a casual conversation, one of those casual conversations you have with people about how fabulous Paris's cycling infrastructure was. And we thought, well, why don't we go and see it for ourselves? And so we organized a self-funded trip in May this year. There isn't a Paris equivalent to the LCC, but we did have contacts with some really lovely campaign groups, notably Paris-Axtell, Paris in the Saddle, who were very well connected with other groups in Paris. Paris-Axtell themselves are quite a young organization set up in 2015, and they concentrate mainly on Paris and the immediate suburbs where they've got local groups. We also had contacts with Mieux se déplacer à bicyclette, who I think you translate that as better by bike. They are the oldest association. They were set up in the 1970s, I think, when cycling had about a 0% of modal share. And they cover all of the Ile-de-France region as well as Paris, but less presence inside Paris itself. But they've got very, very local networks everywhere outside. Both those organizations are part of the Collectif Vélo, which is comprised of many other small independent organizations. I think there were more than 40 of them. And altogether, the Collectif has got 8,000 members. So the LCC, for comparison, has got 12,000, and this Collectif has got 8. So our group was made up of 14 people, a mixture of LCC trustees, LCC borough groups in Brent, Islington, and Wandsworth. We had the CEO of Joyriders with us, and also somebody from Cyclox in Oxford, young Danny, Wandering Danny, more commonly known as. Paris-Axtell were so helpful. We couldn't have done the trip without them. They organised a couple of meetings with local politicians, one who had a Green mayor and one who didn't. Guillaume Durand, Deputy Mayor of the 14th district in the south of Paris, and Vincent Goulin, who is the Deputy Mayor of the 20th in the east of Paris. And although we didn't go to the east of Paris to see him, we met him more centrally. And I had to put in that photo of the town hall in the 14th. I mean, some of Paris's architecture is just magnificent. And that's us all, tiny little Lowry figures in front of the town hall. So we had a day of meetings with the two deputy mayors. And then we had a fabulous day where we did nothing but cycle around Paris with people who knew all about the good, the not so good, and what the chuff is that cycling infrastructure. This was before the Olympic Games, so a lot of things were in the process of being built, and I think there were some bits of infrastructure which surprised the campaigners. We had a picnic lunch by the river. We had a lovely evening at night with them, and it was a really fun and informative trip. So if any of them are on the call today who are going to be listening to the recording, a big thank you to them. We couldn't have done it without them. So I'll be quiet now and pass over to Sylvia, who'll give you her key points of what she took from the tour.
Thank you, Ellie. So I'm Sylvia, so I'm originally from outer Paris, and I'm an active travel campaigner in Northwest London. And I currently work for Sustrans as an embedded officer for London Council Highway Department. So let's start with the wider context. So this is the two cities next to each other at scale. And the main difference between the two cities is that so London is 32 boroughs plus the city plus, so that's 33 local authorities, and then you got TfL. And the mayor of London roughly manage about 5% of the roads. So in Paris, you've got 20 arrondissements plus 3 departments, which in itself is 7 cities and 131 local authorities. So the mayor of Paris has powers over all the roads within Paris Central. However, the police and the prefecture and the body looking after the heritage and assets have power of veto. And then you have the region Île-de-France, which is the Grand Paris plus 7 more departments. So that's a total about 1,276 local authorities, and that's 12 million inhabitants in total. The region has no power whatsoever, but they've got lots of money, and that's important for what follows. So the result is it was described that way by our host, that it was like a millefeuille. So it's a multi-layers of very fragmented decision makings. And as a result, there's inside of Paris, it's fine. Outside of Paris, it's a bit more fragmented, and the modal share is still fairly low. So since credit is due to Anne Hidalgo because she's done a lot of things for Paris, but I would like to give credit also to the previous mayor, which was he was Bertrand Delanoë, and he started by doing something, a few things, because he was elected on a very climate-driven agenda. He was very concerned about, or very willing to improve the Parisians' quality of life. So that kind of drove his policies. And when he started to do anything to the streets, he was always criticized. And one of the things that he used to say all the time was that, why should I continue to give a quarter of Parisians 95% of the public highways? It's unjust. And that was his leading principle. So interestingly, I went to the walking and cycling conference last week, and I've met one of the speakers was the deputy mayor of Paris, the current one, and he updated that figure. So now they stand at 4.3% of motorists taking about 80% of the public space. So it's still quite high, but they are going into the right direction. So Bertrand Delanoë was mostly known for the introduction of the Vélib, which was very successful, for Paris Plage, and for widening the bus lanes, which was kind of credited with a change in the way the cycling rate improved, because following the widening of the bus lanes, he also allowed for the first time cyclists to use the bus lanes. And he also closed the banks of the Seine in 2013. So when Anne Hidalgo came in, there was a fairly quiet commitment. But so she came in 2014. A year later, so the associations that Ellie kind of described, so there was about 30 to 40 of them. They've rallied together. They've created the Collectif Île-de-France Vélo, and they started to work on a regional network. And they came up with that plan, which is on the left of your screen. And in following up on this, in 2019, they've published, so they've published the map that you see. They've also published a sort of CROW, which is a technical manual for quality standard, and also for nurturing political will. And Danny will talk to you about this a bit later. And in 2019, they had massive public transport strike towards the end of the year. And that's when this kind of, there was a rise again. That was the first, what they call the first boom in cycling, when people really turned to bicycle because there was nowhere else. You could move around the city and you still had to go to work or school or wherever. And then obviously they had 2020, the COVID. So just like everywhere else, Paris was looking to introduce a transport recovery plan and social distancing. And they've used that plan that the collective has come up with to create the network. And the region, as you remember, they've got lots of money. They've decided to approve that plan and to adopt it. And now this is the official map based on that plan, which is called the RER, the Vélo Île-de-France. So the region committed to 300 million euros for the plan, and they've promised to fund up to 60% of the plan, as long as it's up to the standard, which have been described in the French CROW. So they think that it's probably going to cost around 600 million in total. But by the end of the first Hidalgo mandate, the work of the collective had a huge impact in terms of changing the pace and the standard of the practitioner. So for Paris, inside the central of Paris, the plan, again, they follow. So that's the plan that was based, again, on the work that the association have done. And this is where they are now. So there's about 45% built so far, and they estimate that it will be 56% by 2025, and it will probably be completed in 2030. So this altogether kind of succeeded in, for the first time ever in Paris, as you may have heard, this year in April, cycle trips kind of overtook driven trips for the first time. And quite a few new cycle lanes have been built. And between 2021 and 2023, there's a 71% increase in use of the cycle lane. So in Greater Paris, the model share is almost in Paris. So you can see the statistics here. Outside of Paris, it's slightly lower, but it's still kind of impressive. And obviously also the other important point is because that was on the running up to the Olympics, there was quite a lot of work as well going there. And they've created, they've funded and implemented 68 new public transport stations as part of the Olympic legacy. So the other aspect in Paris, which I found was quite good, was that there is the wall approach. So for instance, so you got the building cycle lane, they're reducing cars and motor traffic, but they also have quite a lot of incentives, and sometimes they are cumulative. So for instance, the region with lots of money, they've got this region-wide model where you can hire a bike for 2-3 months, you pay per month just to see if it works for you, and then it kind of help you in your journey to kind of switch. And the range of cycles available are impressive. You've got standard two-wheelers, non-electric, electric. You've got different type of cargo bikes. You've got adapted cycles, and you can even be there's even subsidies to buy an e-kit that you can retrofit. And so that's the region level. Then at the local level, so your local council might be offering you some offers. Sometimes it's a few €100s. And then you will have at your place of works, you might have some help. And by law, I think also employers have to contribute towards travel cost. And sometimes that could translate into also helping you with bicycles and equipments and so on. So in terms of my main takeaway from the trip, so for instance, they were going big and bold, and one of the councillor that we've met said that it was like a band-aid effect. So their starting point that whatever you do, you're going to be faced with criticism, so you may as well go for the whole thing. So this is, for instance, a 5-arm junction in the middle of Paris, and they've decided to turn it into an urban forest. Why not? Then whenever there's challenges and criticism, they always go back to the mandate. They've been elected on the mandate. So anything to do with the policies, the strategies, and individual elected official, they've been approved already by via the democratic process. So when a candidate wins, their mandate wins. So from there on, the people are consulted on how, not on if. Consistency, because again, based on what Delano started decades ago, that's the continuity of it. So for instance, this is a picture of one of the bus lane that was widened. And I found that there was everything, it was all at the same time. And we kind of know there's been a few research about this, showing that everything works better if you've got, the built environment, which is made safer, less hostile, but also some help with the equipment, with learning, with everything. And you also have the regulatory environment, which is, for instance, the contraflow. There's a law in Paris where any streets which is 30 kilometers, making all the 30, so it's 20 miles per hour road contraflow by law. And Joanna will talk to you about this a bit later. And then what they do also, they kind of notice that some things are cheaper to do than others. So for instance, this is a school and they've decided it was cheaper to just completely pedestrianize it. Then they always keep in their sight the long-term vision. So for instance, they're quite happy to adapt after they've proposed something, to kind of modifying slightly, but they're not going to dilute the principle. What I found really interesting as well is, again, by law, they have any local authority with more than 80,000 inhabitants will have to have Conseil de Quartier, which is some sort of neighborhood council. So it's like there's this ongoing discussion and conversation between the council and the people. So I think it's better because it's not only, you don't only seek people's feedback when you have something to propose. It's just, it seems that it's better to me that it's just a regular conversation. And again, there's the point where the people are local experts in their local area, but this is kind of combined with the local expertise of experts. Everybody keeps their expertise, but the expertise together, you can do great things. And so finally, all in all, I think it's really good and it works because they've touched on everything. They've touched on the infrastructure, the regulatory, the environment, and the contractual. So to go back to the Limebag discussion, for instance, Paris has a Paris-wide agreement. And in it, it stipulates that each dockless operator cannot have more than 2 or 3 bikes of their from their operation per stands. So, it's really, really specific. And personally, I haven't seen the dockless bikes abandoned like we can see in London. So maybe that's one thing that we can look forward to over here. And now I'm going to pass it on to Danny. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk more about the infrastructure and less about the context. The most important thing that they've done in Paris is basically reallocate space. Basically, everything they've done essentially sits on top of removing cars and reusing the space that's given them. So you look at the example Sylvia showed you of the Place de Catalonia, where the urban forest has gone in. If you move on to some slides, so this is the cycle tracks on the Rue Lafayette, which had just opened when we went there. As you can see, it's a one-way road now for general motor traffic with a contraflow bus lane. If you go to the next slide, you'll see this used to be just 2 lanes each way, again for a bus lane. So one of the constraints that they've got in Paris is that none of the space reallocation has removed any bus lanes or other bus priority measures. So I know this is a problem in London, I think, and it's also a problem in Oxford. So, you might just have to make some roads one way to find the space if you can't touch the bus lanes. Anyway, next slide, please. So this is famous. This is Rue de Rivoli. You can see what used to be the 2-way cycle track on the left. That's now one way, and this is in front of us is one way the other way. This is clearly quite excessive. So what they've done is they've allocated the extra space to the cycle track just to reduce the space for cars. So the remaining one-way lane for cars on the right doesn't allow overtaking. I assume that's deliberate. So they basically reduced it to 1 lane. I assume if they ever rebuild this properly, then a whole of this space is going to go back to the footways because they clearly need to be widened. Next slide, please. And again, this is the extreme example. It's one of the left bank of the Seine, so there's no cars at all. Well, actually, a police car did come by while we were there, but that's an exception. Next slide. Okay, so the other, obviously, reallocation of space from cars is, well, we call them low traffic neighborhoods. The French call them rue apaisée or calmed streets is the literal translation. But at least in Paris, this doesn't just involve traffic calming, it involves modal filtering and removal of through traffic. So here's just a random example. If you go to the next one, I think it's another example. Next slide. Okay, so this is Rue de Meur. I think this used to have 6,000 cars a day before they modally filtered at one end and put a modal filter one in the middle, and it's one way, basically no way to get through traffic through contraflow cycling. It's now under 1,000. So I think the estimate is about 1,000 motor vehicles a day. So that's an example. The other interesting thing, I think you go to the next slide. Oh no, not yet. But the other interesting thing is that how little illegal parking there is in Paris, I noticed. So I'm not quite sure. There are a lot is done by bollards. You can see the road here is just lined with bollards on both sides. And I reckon that the bollard density in Paris must be like 10 times that of the bollard density in Oxford. And that's obviously the most effective way of stopping parking. No one wants to argue with steel bollards. There's none of this plastic bollard stuff here. And probably some sort of enforcement, because obviously you can't do anything with bollards. But I can remember Paris 20 years ago was notorious for completely outrageous parking, and there wasn't any of that, or so little of it that I didn't notice that. So I guess that's the other, you exclude the cars. Anyway, next slide. So this is the book that we're talking about. It's not an equivalent of CRO or LTN 120 in that it's not official. So it's more like the London Cycling Design Standards. It's a publication of Paris Ancel. The official French documentation by Carrera is apparently way out of date. So this is quite good because, to my mind, it puts the fundamentals much more clearly than LTN 120 or CRO. So anyone who's ever looked at LTN 120 will see that a very key number, which is basically the traffic volume at which you have to start providing cycling infrastructure, is hidden away in diagram 4.1 and not actually stated very clearly. This puts their limit for that, 2,000 passenger car units per day, right up the front. So it basically says, first thing you have to consider is how much traffic do you have. If the traffic is under this, or you can get the traffic under that level, then you can mix cycling with motor traffic. Otherwise, you have to provide cycling infrastructure. And that's kind of a clear bifurcation, and that's not that clear in LTN 120. It's also, so it's only in French, unfortunately. There's a free PDF version. I read it using automated translation and my school French. It was worthwhile. I've downloaded it before, but never looked at it for this trip. Especially if you have any members or key officers who can read French fluently, I would recommend pointing them at this. Yeah, next slide. All right, so my favorite French terms, stationnement sauvage, or if we forgive my pronunciation, illegal parking, but literally it means savage parking, wild parking, or feral parking, which I thought was quite nice because that's kind of what it is. The other one is the rue apaisée, the calm streets, and Chowkidou, which has no English equivalent. Edge lane road is the kind of phrase they use in the US, and it's a term coined from chaussée circulation douce, or gentle traffic street. Basically a carriage road, the center lane removed, and wide cycle lanes on either side. Anyway, next slide. I think that was all really. All right, so yes, some of the bits are not so convincing are the junctions. When we were cycling around by ourselves on the first day, a couple of junctions we had to do like left turns across 2 lanes of traffic without any protection. And here you can see a woman, she's turning onto that nice, huge cycle track on Rue de Rivoli, but she's got a go-ahead signal at the same time as the traffic turning right across her. So, it's not ideal. If you go on next slide, this is this horrible roundabout just outside the hostel we were staying in. And so it was quite good. I posted saying, this is horrible. Someone should do something to this. And they said, yes, there are plans for it. We don't need the plans. So you get a feel for how fast they're moving in Paris. Every time we asked about something, they had plans for it. Or so in one case, I think the members of the team of the tour had the cycle track open outside the hotel, but like the day after they moved in. So it was being constructed when they moved in, and when they moved out, it actually opened. So things were just happening all over the place. Here you can see what used to be a roundabout, and again, they're planning to put an urban forest in and turn it into a U shape. But the plan is for that purple bit to be a 2-way cycle track, but with no separation at all from the central carriageway. So I think you can probably guess, you can see what the problems with that are going to be. The Dutch roundabouts always have the setback from the carriageway so that people are crossing. Anyway, this didn't look at all convincing to me. And the Place de Catalogne, where the urban forest was, that we cycled on that, and that had some of the same problems you could see. You can see the Place de la Bastille actually very clearly. If you run the peripheral cycle track directly alongside the road, then these designs just don't really work. And I think what's happened here is that the urban planners have taken over. They want to reclaim as much space as possible for public realm, so they've just said, "Oh, we'll cram the cycle track right up against the road." Anyway, that's all I think. Next slide. Oh yes, good cakes. You should go and visit. And there's a blog post with more technical stuff and more you want to look at that. Okay, so thanks.
Sorry to interrupt, but we've probably got a maximum of 5 minutes left. So we really want to hear from the next two speakers. So just if you could both keep that in mind, and it might be that people have to just put questions in the chat and we can answer questions in the chat. All right.
We'll keep things brief. I'm Johanna. I'm a cycle campaigner in Islington. And I was going to a few words about the national context and how that's rigged up cycle infrastructure. And a key thing that I took away was that France is really embracing formalizing
we're losing Johanna. I think
there were some images on the other
Johanna,
speaker slides.
I don't know if you can hear me. Your connection isn't very good. We can't.
Okay. Hello?
Yeah, I suggest turning off your video.
Yeah.
Is it any better now?
You want to get going and we'll see.
Apologies.
That's right.
Any better?
Yes.
So something I took away was that France is doing well at formalizing the informal, and they've introduced that they give way. Sorry about that. Is it any better now?
It's just dropping out. It keeps dropping out.
Maybe I should pass on to Mariam instead.
Someone can carry on. Sorry.
Shall I start?
Yes,
yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, I'm Mariam. I am the CEO of Joyriders and also an active travel campaigner. Also part of the LCC Women's Network Steering Group. I think, yeah, I went to Paris because I've never been to Paris, so I wanted to go, and obviously was really keen on cycling there as well, and that was a great opportunity. And I'm just going to really talk quickly about the things that stood out to me compared to London, but also compared to the Netherlands and Germany, where I lived previously. I think generally it was really nice to see the cycling infrastructure. It was much more than I expected. A few times a bit chaotic, but that was probably more the build up to the Olympics than anything else, because we cycled past a few of the places, which was really interesting. I think key differences I really noticed between London and Paris was loads more cargo bikes. Interestingly, I haven't seen any of the illegal e-bikes we have a lot here in London, like the delivery drivers often have, or some of the commuters. So they were literally absent, and I think that really comes because electric bikes are quite subsidized in France. So that was really positive to see that problem just didn't seem to be there. There were maybe a couple, but here you just go out of the road and you see 5 in 5 minutes. That was really nice. Also, yeah, a lot of cargo bikes, a few families cycling together, although that could be more. So I think there's still some work to do. Another thing that really stood out for me was that the campaigners were really young. And I think that was really nice to see, because it was almost like the younger people, the next generation, is taking ownership of what they want and what they want to see. There were a few more middle-aged campaigners as well, but I think when I go to any meetings in London from any campaigns group, it's largely older people there and quite male-dominated. But yeah, there it was still quite male-dominated, but there were a few women as well. Same like here, I think quite similar. But it was nice to see a lot of young people really campaigning for change to infrastructure. It was all really well organized. It was fantastic to see the whole of Paris. So I think we've really got a tour not just of the touristy bits, but also of the kind of real Paris. And overall, it felt like really wherever we went, it was mostly really well. There were a few junctions, I guess quite similar to in London, which were horrific. So they still have that. It's not all perfect. Obviously, it's more confusing for us when we come from here because the traffic is on the right side as well. So that's another more confusing part. Again, as I think Sylvia mentioned, the Lime bikes are not scattered everywhere like they are here. So obviously they must be doing something right in that regard. And that was really nice to see. And if anyone is here from Paris who organized the trip, thank you so much. It was fantastic. Also, big thanks to Ailey for managing all this. And now I'm keeping quiet and I think pass back to Ailey.
Thank you,
for
Maria.
a last word. Yeah.
Thank you everybody for presenting today. Yeah, so I think you've got a good flavour of what we got up to. We are hoping next year to have a reciprocal visit by the Paris campaigners to London. I'm going to be talking to them about that soon. And the next city in our sights is Ghent. So we're hoping to organise a trip to Ghent next year. So thank you, everybody. I'm sorry Johanna didn't get a chance to go through her slides. And thank you, Active Travel Cafe, for giving us the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. And I'm also very sorry that we didn't get to hear from Johanna. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really inspiring to hear about other places, and it's really lovely to hear that you had that such a warm welcome from campaigners, and to hear that there are lots of young people there campaigning for cycling. I think if anybody has any questions, would you put them in the chat? And I'm hoping some of you might be able to stay on and answer them if there are questions. And I'm sorry that we just have such a packed session this evening. I'm going to have to move on now. And moving on, I can see we're already ready to go here, Mark, with the good, the bad, and the interesting. Off you go.
Thank you, Tally. Good evening, everybody. So we are going to have a quick look at how we can make a rural idyll. This sign's not it. Just putting a sign up doesn't make things better, as we know. So this is the countryside edition of what we should do beyond putting signs up. So I'm not going to go through every single bullet point here. Can cycling help rural communities? Here are some of the issues I think we've got. I would say motoring subsuming pretty much the entire road network. Low density populations and transport poverty are really, really big issues in rural places. But you know, you can read for yourself. There's quite a list there of things I think are an issue. We heard about this particular figure earlier. Everyone's seen that, I'd imagine, on these tools. I've shown it a few times. I'm going to skip this and go straight, actually, to the notes. Let's zoom in on the notes. Now, LTM 120 is interesting because it realises that 20 miles an hour might be difficult in places. So maybe 30 is okay. And maybe if the vehicle flows up to 1,000 vehicles a day, might be okay. This is not really about village centres. This is outside of those areas. But it's quite a big implication. If you've got like a rural road, national speed limit, 8,000 vehicles a day running down it, we've got a problem for cycling. So that's an interesting starting point. But of course, let's have a look at the Dutch standard, which I'm not going to go through in detail. But essentially, if we're outside of built-up areas, we are still looking at residential roads. Quite often they're 60 kilometres an hour, which is 40 miles an hour. But they actually increasingly are dropping speeds down to 30 kilometres an hour or 20 miles an hour, where people are mixing with traffic. Just have a look here where it's less than 2,500 vehicles a day. As a basic response, yes, we can mix with traffic. So it's fairly similar to elsewhere of LT 120, but we've gone a little bit lower with that 1,000 PCU. If this is part of the main structure, however, the only way you'll mix is if you've got quite a lot of cycles. You need more than 500. Anyway, let's not get into the detail on that. Let's look at something a bit more interesting. So we can get into a debate about routes, where we should go. I'm saying we should think bigger. We're very good at delivering routes up until the point they become difficult. Motoring has access pretty much everywhere door to door. So that makes cycling difficult, and probably more in the village areas, walking wheeling difficult too. So we have a good motoring network as a default, as it's grown over 100 years. So if we want to develop a cycling network in its own right, which connects these places together, walking wheeling can benefit, depends on local context. And sometimes it is not even about cycling, walking or wheeling, it's about nice villages and places to go. So I'm going to very quickly run through this little diagram here. So the red roads are A roads, purple roads are B roads, the green are unclassified. This is very, very loosely based on somewhere in the UK, but I can't tell you where. But essentially, we've got, look, there's a town at the top here, there's a town at the bottom here, various junctions, which could be fairly big junctions, I suppose. We've also got village, and then up in the green area, the little hamlet, and here's another village here. So we see this a lot. We've bypassed places, maybe with B roads years ago. Then we've come and bypassed the bypass of A roads. So actually, there's a bit of a network going on. So how should the network function? Can we decide on which should be the flow roads, which should be the A roads, the busy through roads? What would be the access roads where people live, and which roads between the two? Can we repurpose any of them? Do we need land? Are there interim solutions? Can we redesign the cross-section of the highway, so squeeze the traffic and release some space somewhere else? We can play around with speed limits. Modal filtering is entirely possible in rural places. With main roads to cross, are we prepared to build some new roads to bypass areas to make things easier? And in some parts of the country, we have resilience, especially in the winter, which will be problematic. I should probably have added on here, of course, we have lots of agricultural vehicles in certain places, and some of those vehicles can be very big, weird, and wonderful. So we can't forget those. So here is that network redesigned. Essentially, what I've done here is actually built a little tiny bypass around the village, something fairly, very low key, which releases the village from that through traffic which was there before. Blue is a network of off-road paths. Silver is a third separated cycle track on the main road. And then down here, we've converted one of those green roads into a bridleway. A grade separated that junction of the A road. So what's happening here really is the through traffic has to go on the red roads. You've the B road to go past and resilience, and also as another access to the villages. But the villages here, the hamlet, are now filtered essentially. So we've done a lot here at the network level in terms of design. So it shouldn't be a surprise. We don't do network plans enough here. We should do. The way to actually get this to stick somewhere is adopt a policy, following proper engagement processes to give it some weight. Look at some early feasibility work at the right scale. So don't dive straight in and trying to design a scheme. Let's actually look at the network and these feasibilities. There's going to be obvious barriers, rivers, railways, big roads. This is about trying to deliver a long-term plan, and then develop that delivery plan over time. Can we get anything quickly, get momentum? And often we're talking about a very basic level of connection here, just getting people from a village to a town or between the villages. You're never going to get higher levels of people using it. This is about as important as connecting a telephone line to somebody in the middle of nowhere. So that's going to really have real problems trying to compete with urban schemes with high BCRs. Sometimes quick and dirty does the job, and we shouldn't give up in villages. Very, very quickly to round off, 3 examples from the very south of Zealand, which is the southwest part of the Netherlands, and it's the least populated part of the country. So 3 quick examples. So this is the village of Terhol. As you approach the village, you're on a cycle track, and opt into the distance, you start to mix with traffic in the village itself, which has a 30 km/h speed limit. This has been bypassed, so they've come back in and done some work either after or part of that scheme. So in the village centre, if you're a cyclist, you mix traffic. There's lots of public realm. The street is designed to be slow. Really, there's no advantage coming through here. You may as well stay on the bypass. Skirting the north of the village, you can just see in the distance there's a big roundabout, but there is a network of cycle track that takes off to the next village going off the right-hand side here. You'll see the bus shelter on the right. That's actually been relocated round onto the end of the national road round there, just so the buses don't have to come and then go out the village again. But they have retained some cycle parking. Probably not the best example in the Netherlands, but it's there all the same. So Kingsdijk, which is a little bit further on, very, very simple treatment here. The sign on the right-hand side translates as accept local traffic. So the only people in there who are not cycling, obviously, will be, there's a couple of farms, a couple of houses, and that's it. Nobody else should be in there. That is essentially a cycle track with agricultural access. We can do that in the UK, no problem at all. And then finally, we're in Vogelwald, which is a little bit to the north there. This is as it was in 2017, so there's some edge cycle lanes. There's some pretty hefty traffic calming that runs on the outskirts of the village. Village centre It's quite nice. It's been repaved. There's lots of trees, but you're still mixing the traffic. So the obvious next thing here is to actually build a bypass, because this is the main road up to other places. And that's what they've done. So this is something I noticed a couple of weeks ago. So there's the village with its traffic coming going off there on the left, with its 30 km/h speed limit. And they've actually built a bypass. It's 1,000 meters long. It's not gold plated like it would in the UK. So this is actually quite a tight bend going around here. And here it is beyond the bend, 40 kilometers an hour. So it's not fast by, 40 miles an hour. So it's not fast by any means. And what they've actually done here is taken the opportunity to create a new access to a big horseshoe factory of all things, which will come out onto this new bypass road, and that gets all of the commercial vehicle, all of the heavy traffic out of the village itself. And the little lane you see crossing here used to be a rural road. That is now a cycle track. There we go. Hopefully that was quick enough, Sally.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And Mark, if you're able to email the slides, we could put those up on the website and then people can browse them at their leisure. That would be great. I'm afraid I'm not going to take any questions. So also, if you have questions for Mark, you can. I'm sure he will answer them on social media. So that just leaves me to thank all of our speakers who have been fantastic tonight. Lovely to see those examples from abroad. I did some urban and rural cycling in Germany this summer, and yeah, you know, many of those things that we've seen were visible in those sort of places too. So it's definitely possible here. And so that just leaves next week to say that next week we have Andrew Smith, who's the Director of Planning, Transportation and Economic Development at Leicester City Council. He's going to share how and why the city is transforming to a more walkable and cycle-friendly city as part of its long-term regeneration plans. So that sounds like it'll be another one not to miss. And I hope you all have a great week, and we will see you next Tuesday, hopefully. Bye, everyone.
Bye.